At 9:45 on November 10, 1944, Sergeant Warren Cressy crouched inside the steel hull of his M4 Sherman tank north of Morville, France, peering through a narrow vision slit as flashes of German gunfire flickered between trees ahead. The interior smelled of oil, hot metal, and cordite. Every sound inside the tank echoed: engine vibration, turret gears grinding, the metallic click of ammunition being handled. Cressy was 21 years old. He had been in combat for exactly 3 days. The 761st Tank Battalion had already buried 24 men and lost 14 tanks since entering the line. There was no margin for hesitation. Dog Company rolled forward through a wooded corridor, following the 26th Infantry Division's advance. German anti-tank teams had turned every stone wall, every hedgerow, every tree line into a potential kill zone. Somewhere ahead, concealed behind camouflaged nets and carefully dug pits, 88mm guns waited. The 761st, the Black Panthers, were the first African-American armored unit committed to combat in the European theater. They had trained for 2 long years at Camp Hood, Texas, while white tank battalions rotated overseas after a fraction of that time. Army leadership had doubted them openly, questioned their discipline, questioned their intelligence, questioned whether they could operate radios, manage fire control systems, coordinate under pressure. General George Patton himself had addressed them before their first mission in October. "You are not going to be compared to other Negro units," he had told them. "You will be compared to every tank unit in the American Army." Their shoulder patch read simply, "Come out fighting." For 72 straight hours, that is exactly what they had done. But the Sherman had weaknesses every tanker understood. Its frontal armor, barely 2 inches thick, could be penetrated by German anti-tank guns from well over 1,000 yards. The Sherman's 75mm cannon required half that distance to threaten German armor effectively. That meant American crews had to drive directly into enemy fire to be lethal. They joked darkly about it. Ronsons, they called them, like cigarette lighters. Lights first time every time. Cressy knew the arithmetic. The battalion had started with 54 Shermans. 40 remained. They would run out of tanks before they ran out of objectives. Corporal Harry Thierry, his driver, once told another crew that Sergeant Cressy was 2 different men. Off the battlefield, he was quiet, soft-spoken, almost shy behind horn-rimmed glasses. In combat, something hardened. Thierry had watched him ride exposed atop the turret, manning the .50 caliber machine gun while bullets sparked off the hull around him. Twice officers had reprimanded him for recklessness. They never punished him. The battalion needed men who advanced when doctrine said withdraw. 3 days earlier, Sergeant Roy King had been killed leading the push into Morville. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers had refused evacuation after a mine shredded his leg. He would later die when German shells penetrated his turret. White company commanders had already fallen. Black officers now led the advance. Combat was the only language that mattered. At 9:50, Cressy's Sherman moved through a break in the trees at 8 miles per hour, fast enough to complicate targeting, slow enough to avoid blundering into unseen threats. Infantry advanced 50 yards behind, crouched low, using the tanks as steel shields. At 9:53, German machine gun fire raked across the lead tank. Sparks burst from armor. No penetration. Cressy tracked the muzzle flashes, 70 yards northeast, low among shattered pines. On the way, his gunner fired 3 high-explosive rounds. The machine gun went silent. At 9:55, something slammed into the right side of Cressy's Sherman with bone-jarring force. The sound was metallic and violent, steel struck by steel at extreme velocity. Non-penetrating hit. The tank lurched, but kept moving. Hull intact, Thierry shouted. "Track's good." At 9:57, the second impact came. This one punched through. The interior filled instantly with choking smoke and burning propellant fumes. Shards of metal ricocheted inside the turret. The gunner screamed. The loader scrambled for the hatch. Flames licked through wiring behind the engine compartment. Cressy made the calculation every tank commander dreads. Stay inside and burn, or climb out into open ground under enemy guns. He grabbed the rim of the commander's hatch and pulled himself upward into daylight. What he saw stopped him cold. 40 yards ahead, partially concealed behind a hedgerow, a German anti-tank gun crew was reloading. They were not focused on him. They were lining up their next shot, at the second Sherman in the column. Cressy hit the ground beside his burning tank at 9:58. German small arms fire snapped overhead, kicking dirt around his boots. To his left, 30 yards away, sat an American half-track partially shielded behind a stone wall. Mounted on its pintle was a Browning M1919A4, 30 caliber machine gun. Cressy ran. 8 seconds. He reached the half-track, gripped the twin handles, and swung the barrel toward the anti-tank position. The Browning roared. At 400 rounds per minute, at 40 yards, the effect was immediate and devastating. He walked the stream of bullets across the gun pit. The anti-tank weapon fell silent. Its crew did not rise. Then he saw something else. Higher ground, northwest. A church tower, 200 yards distant. German artillery observers stood in its upper windows, directing mortar fire onto American infantry. Cressy adjusted aim and fired controlled bursts into the tower openings. The mortar fire stopped. By 10:15, the immediate kill zone was neutralized. Behind him, his Sherman continued burning, a black column of smoke marking where it had died. His crew had escaped with only minor injuries. But the battalion could not afford to lose ground. At 10:40, a replacement M4 Sherman rolled forward from reserve. Same 75mm gun. Same armor. Same vulnerabilities. Different serial number. Cressy's crew mounted up. At 11 o'clock, they pushed north again. Dense woods restricted visibility to 50 yards in most directions. Stone farmhouses and low walls provided perfect ambush positions for German Panzerfaust teams. The ground was soft from recent rain, bogging down tracks if speed dropped too low. Every yard had to be fought for. Machine guns pinned. Mortars harassed. Anti-tank guns struck. Then the Germans withdrew to the next defensive line and repeated the pattern. By 1400 hours, the 761st had advanced only 800 yards. 800 yards paid for in steel and blood. And the day was not over. By mid-afternoon, the woods north of Morville were littered with smoke, shattered timber, and the metallic echo of gunfire. Dog Company had already crushed 3 machine gun nests, silenced 2 mortar teams, and cleared 5 stone farm buildings room by room. The cost was steep. 2 more Shermans damaged, 11 infantrymen wounded, but the line kept moving. At 15:20, an infantry lieutenant from the 26th Division sprinted through drifting smoke and flagged down Cressy's replacement tank. He needed elevation. 400 yards ahead, the ground rose toward a wooded ridgeline that offered a clear vantage point over German defensive positions. On foot, he would be cut down before reaching it. He asked for armor. Cressy nodded once. The lieutenant climbed onto the hull, crouching low behind the turret as Thierry eased the Sherman forward at 6 miles per hour. The tank moved carefully through dense timber, weaving between trunks. Visibility shrank to 30 yards. Every shadow could conceal a Panzerfaust. Cressy rode exposed again, boots braced against steel, scanning constantly. He had learned that armor could protect a crew from steel, not from surprise. At 15:35, they broke through the treeline near the crest. German machine guns erupted from 70 yards ahead. The impact sparks flashed across bark and stone. Dirt kicked up around the hull. Reverse! Cressy shouted. Thierry threw the transmission back. The Sherman rolled backward and dropped. The rear of the tank slammed downward into a concealed anti-tank ditch hidden beneath light snow. The hull pitched upward at a brutal 40-degree angle. The engine deck, the Sherman's weakest armor, now faced the enemy. 13 millimeters of steel protected the engine compartment. One solid hit would turn the tank into a furnace. Inside the turret, Cressy grabbed the radio handset and called for assistance. Another Sherman from Dog Company responded immediately and began pushing toward their position under fire. German gunners adjusted. Now 2 American tanks were under direct engagement. Infantry behind them were pinned flat to frozen ground, unable to move. At 15:40, the rescue tank roared into position. Cressy did not hesitate. He climbed out through the hatch into a storm of incoming rounds. Bullets rang off armor like hail on sheet metal. He sprinted to the assisting Sherman, seized a heavy tow cable, and ran it back across open ground. 90 seconds. 90 seconds exposed in the open while German machine guns raked the clearing. He secured the cable to the front tow hook. At 15:42, the assisting tank pulled. The trapped Sherman tore free of the ditch in a spray of mud and splintered earth. Cressy scrambled back inside. An armor-piercing round struck the right hull, ricocheted, and screamed away into the trees. Thierry tried to drive them back toward cover. Nothing. The transmission engaged, but the tank would not move. Something had shattered during extraction. Behind them, American infantry remained pinned in exposed ground. German gunners had perfect lanes of fire. If those positions were not suppressed, men would start dying in seconds. Cressy climbed out again. He moved directly to the turret-mounted Browning M2, 50 caliber machine gun. The M2 was built for aircraft defense, but in practice it was a battlefield hammer, effective to nearly a mile, capable of tearing through brick, light vehicles, and men alike. He swung the heavy barrel toward the German positions and opened fire. The weapon bucked violently in his hands. 20-round bursts, 30-round bursts. Brass casings clattered across steel. Each 5-inch round carried the force to pulverize whatever it struck. German gun teams were not expecting enfilade fire from an immobilized tank. One nest fell silent. Then another. Under the thunder of the 50 caliber, the pinned infantry withdrew in bounding movements, dragging wounded with them. By 1555, all 11 trapped soldiers had reached cover. The Sherman still could not move. Inside, Thierry and the crew worked frantically. The right track had thrown pins. Tension was off. Repairs would take 15 minutes at minimum. 15 minutes sitting still in contested terrain. At 1600 hours, German fire resumed, from new angles. They had repositioned during the withdrawal. Rounds sparked off armor. Cressy answered with the M2. Infantry began maneuvering to flank the new gun teams. At 1618, emergency repairs were completed. Thierry engaged the transmission. The Sherman lurched forward 3 feet. Stopped. The left final drive had cracked. The tank was dead. The crew bailed out and established a perimeter around the immobilized hull, using it as steel cover while diagnosing the damage. There would be no field repair under fire. At 1630, the woods shifted again. German infantry, roughly 40 men, advanced from the northeast in organized squads. A counterattack. They were attempting to retake the ground lost that morning. Cressy climbed back onto the disabled Sherman. The turret still rotated. The 50 caliber still fed. The tank could not move, but it could still kill. He opened fire. The heavy rounds tore through brush and shattered bark. The German advance faltered immediately. Men dove for trees and depressions, but they did not withdraw. They were regrouping. American forward observers called in artillery. Coordinates transmitted. 2 miles south, 105 mm howitzers answered. At 1645, the first shells landed 200 yards north of Cressy's position. Adjustments followed. The next salvo crashed into the heart of the German assault line. While artillery walked across the treeline, Cressy spotted another threat. An anti-tank team was maneuvering 300 yards east, trying to gain a firing angle on the immobilized Sherman. He traversed and fired at extreme range. The anti-tank crew flattened under the impact. At 1700 hours, the counterattack collapsed. German artillery ceased. Infantry pulled back. The immediate threat ended. At 1720, a recovery vehicle arrived to tow the crippled Sherman away. 2 tanks lost under Cressy's command in 7 hours. Both times he survived. Both times he climbed out of protection and continued the fight. The after-action report would record numbers. 1,200 yards advanced. 8 machine gun positions destroyed. 2 anti-tank guns neutralized. Multiple counterattacks disrupted. 3 killed, 7 wounded. 4 tanks damaged, 1 destroyed. And 1 sergeant who engaged enemy forces with crew-served weapons 3 separate times after his vehicle was disabled. But reports never capture reputation. That evening, inside canvas tents lit by dim lanterns, soldiers began using a new name. Some called him Iron Man. Others said he was the baddest man in the 761st. The battalion historian would later write it more simply. Warren Cressy was the most dangerous man the Germans would face in those French woods. And November 10th was only the beginning. November 11th began before sunrise. At 0600 hours, the 761st Tank Battalion received orders to continue pushing north toward the village of Wyss. The men had slept in defensive positions around Morville, if what they did could be called sleep. Crews worked through the night under blackout discipline, replacing thrown tracks, clearing mud from bogies, cleaning carbon from gun barrels, loading fresh ammunition belts by the faint glow of shielded flashlights. No smoking. No open flame. German artillery listened for carelessness. At 6:30, Warren Cressy was assigned his 3rd Sherman in less than 24 hours. Same 75mm cannon. Same 51mm of frontal armor. Same 33 tons of steel that could burn just as easily as the last two. His crew remained intact. Thierry at the controls. Same gunner. Same loader. Same assistant driver. They had survived 2 destroyed tanks. Statistics did not favor a third. At 7 o'clock, the battalion briefing outlined worsening conditions. German forces had reinforced overnight. Intelligence estimated 2 companies of infantry with anti-tank support waiting along the Morville-West corridor. The terrain ahead was mostly open farmland, broken by scattered woods. In summer, it would have been ideal tank country. In November, after weeks of rain, it was a trap. Dog Company rolled out at 7:30 with 6 operational Shermans. 2 staggered columns. 50 yards between vehicles. Infantry dispersed behind them. The first 800 yards passed without resistance. At 8:20, the lead tank reported movement along a tree line 400 yards ahead. Cressy's vehicle was 3rd in the left column. The formation halted. At 8:25, German machine guns opened fire. Reconnaissance complete. American artillery answered immediately. High explosive rounds crashed into the woods, shredding branches and shaking the earth. Standard doctrine followed. Suppress. Advance armor. Clear with infantry. It worked when tanks could maneuver. At 8:40, Cressy's Sherman rolled onto farmland that had recently been harvested for root vegetables. The soil had been churned. Rain had turned it into thick, sucking mud. Thierry held 8 miles per hour, trying to maintain momentum. For 50 yards, the tracks held. Then the right track slipped. At 8:43, the Sherman stopped. Both tracks spun uselessly. 33 tons of American steel sinking into French mud, while German machine guns opened up from 300 yards away. Thierry tried reverse. The tank sank deeper. Forward again. Nothing. They were stuck. Machine gun rounds sparked off the turret. Armor-piercing rifle rounds snapped against the hull and ricocheted harmlessly, for now. But artillery would follow. A stationary tank was a coordinate. At 8:45, Cressy climbed out of the hatch to assess. The mud had swallowed the running gear nearly to the tops of the road wheels. The hull sat low, suctioned into the earth. Extraction would require tow cables and another tank. German artillery began ranging in at 8:50. 88mm shells landed 200 yards north. Closer with each adjustment. Cressy dropped back inside and called for help. A Sherman from Dog Company responded and maneuvered in on firmer ground. At 9 o'clock, the rescue tank arrived. Its crew chief dismounted with tow cables under fire. Cressy climbed out again and helped secure the lines to the front hooks. German machine gun fire intensified. A ricochet fragment struck the crew chief's arm. He kept working. Cable secured at 9:05. The rescue tank pulled. Nothing. More throttle. Its own tracks began slipping. The mud would not release its grip. There was only one option left. At 9:10, Cressy and his crew dismounted and began digging. Entrenching tools. Hands. Helmets. They clawed mud away from the tracks while bullets stitched the ground around them. The assistant driver remained inside to keep the engine responsive. At 9:20, Cressy looked east. Muzzle flashes blinked from the tree line. And beyond that, American infantry had advanced past the bogged Sherman. They were now pinned in open farmland, exposed, taking direct fire from the same German positions. Men were flattening into mud that offered no cover. Cressy stopped digging. He climbed back onto the turret. He seized the .50 caliber Browning M2, and he opened fire, not to suppress, to destroy. The weapon held roughly 400 rounds. At 550 rounds per minute, he had less than a minute of continuous fire before empty. He made each burst deliberate. First target, 280 yards east, behind a stone wall. 20 rounds. The wall chipped and shattered. Silence. Second position, 310 yards northeast in a drainage ditch. Another controlled burst. Movement ceased. Third position, elevated, 350 yards out. This one kept firing. Cressy adjusted elevation and delivered a longer burst. At 9:25, American infantry rose from the mud and began advancing again under his covering fire. This was how armor and infantry were meant to work. when courage bridged the gap between doctrine and reality. At 9:30, German mortars joined the fight. The hollow thump echoed from the tree-line. Rounds landed 50 yards north. 40, 30. The barrel of the .50 caliber glowed faintly. At 9:34, a mortar round detonated 15 yards from the tank. Shrapnel peppered the hull. Something struck Cressy's shoulder. He ignored it. The elevated German machine gun still fired. He emptied 40 rounds into it. Silence. At 9:40, his ammunition box ran dry. He dropped into the turret. The loader passed up a fresh box. The belt fed. He racked the charging handle. Back in action at 9:42. German mortars shifted to target advancing infantry. That gave Cressy a brief reprieve. He listened. Mortars had a rhythm, a hollow pop, then the rising whistle. He scanned the tree-line, triangulating by sound. There, a faint flash behind a low berm. He elevated the M2 and fired a sustained burst into the suspected mortar pit. The whistle stopped. By 10 o'clock, the immediate machine gun and mortar threats had been neutralized, but the Sherman was still mired in mud, and the day was only beginning. Cressy stood exposed on a tank that could not move, under artillery observation, with ammunition burning away and enemy infantry still probing. He did not climb down. He did not retreat. He kept firing, and November 11th was far from over. Cressy followed the rhythm of the mortar fire. A dull thump from the north-northeast. A brief silence. Then the descending whistle. He traced it mentally to a point roughly 400 yards away. He couldn't see the crew, only treetops and drifting smoke, but artillery was geometry. Impact pattern, sound delay, arc. He elevated the .50 caliber to its maximum angle and fired indirect. The heavy rounds arced upward and vanished beyond the tree-line. It wasn't precision. It was intimidation. It forced heads down. It bought seconds. At 9:50, the mortar fire stopped. Whether the crew was dead or displaced didn't matter. American infantry surged forward, flanking the last German machine gun nests. By 10 o'clock, the defensive line ahead was cracking. But Cressy's Sherman was still buried in mud. The crew resumed digging while he remained atop the turret, scanning, firing short bursts when needed. At 10:15, the ground shook. This wasn't mortars. Heavy artillery. The first salvo landed 200 yards west. Explosions that threw soil 50 feet into the air. The Germans were walking their fire. The second impact at 10:18 landed closer. One more adjustment, and they would bracket the tank. One more after that, and it would be direct. Cressy estimated 3 minutes. At 10:20, a new threat appeared. Through binoculars, 500 yards northeast, he spotted 3 men moving carefully with a long tubular launcher. Panzerschreck. Effective against armor inside 150 meters. They were closing. Cressy swung the M2 toward them and opened fire. 500 yards was extreme range. He compensated for drop and fired sustained bursts. The anti-tank team dove flat, but did not retreat. They were waiting for him to run dry. At 10:25, the crew had cleared enough mud. The rescue tank pulled again. The Sherman shifted. 6 inches. A foot. Then suddenly it broke free. Thierry reversed hard onto firmer ground. They were mobile, but mobility did not mean safety. Cressy lifted his binoculars again and felt the situation shift. The northern tree-line was filling with movement. Not a squad, not a platoon, a company. 150, maybe 200 German infantry forming assault groups. They were preparing a coordinated counterattack. At 10:32, it began. 3 assault elements of roughly 50 men each emerged in disciplined formation. One element advanced while the other 2 laid down suppressive fire. Veteran troops. Methodical. Confident. American infantry forward of Cressy's position were extended and exposed. No immediate artillery. No heavy weapons in place. Just rifles. Cressy's Sherman now had maneuver room. Thierry pivoted the hull for enfilade fire. Cressy remained exposed atop the turret. The 75mm main gun could have engaged, but the .50 caliber had speed, volume, flexibility. At 10:35, he opened fire. 300 yards. The heavy rounds tore through the lead German formation. Men dropped. Others scattered. But the advance did not stop. The second element continued forward while the third laid down suppressive fire. German rounds sparked off Cressy's turret and hull. He did not duck. If he lowered himself into the hatch, Americans would die. If he stayed upright and firing, Germans would. The calculation was simple. At 10:40, the enemy closed to 250 yards. Grenade range approaching. American riflemen were outnumbered. Cressy worked the M2 like a fire hose. Left group, right group, center, back again, keeping all three elements pinned. Brass casings piled high around his boots. The barrel glowed. At 10:45, American 105mm artillery finally answered. Shells smashed into the tree line behind the advancing Germans. The assault wavered. Some units broke back. Others were too committed, too close, to retreat. By 10:55, portions of the German force were within 75 yards of American lines. Faces visible. Grenades already flying. Combat collapsed into chaos. Rifles cracked. Automatic weapons hammered. Men screamed. Cressy elevated the M2 and fired directly over the heads of American infantry into the German assault wave. At 75 yards, every round struck something. The German advance did not slow. It stopped. Not from withdrawal. From annihilation. At 11 o'clock, the counterattack was broken. Survivors fled toward the northern woods. American losses stood at 7 killed, 14 wounded. Without Cressy's fire, it would have been far worse. An entire platoon might have been erased. At 11:30, Dog Company resumed its push toward Wyss. Cressy's Sherman rolled forward once more. But something had changed. Tank commanders were not supposed to fight standing upright under artillery fire. They were not supposed to operate exposed for hours. They were not supposed to become the anchor point of an infantry defense. The battalion historian later calculated. At least 6 machine gun positions neutralized. 1 company-strength counterattack shattered. Multiple mortar and anti-tank threats suppressed. Ammunition expenditure more than double any other tank in Dog Company. But statistics missed the truth. On November 11th, Warren Cressy refused to let ground be retaken. He refused to let Americans be overrun. He stayed exposed when steel protection was available. He chose visibility over safety. He chose aggression over survival. And by mid-afternoon, every man in the 761st understood something clearly. The quiet sergeant with horn-rimmed glasses was not reckless. He was decisive. And the Germans had just learned the same lesson. The road to Wyss did not grow easier. It grew deadlier. Intelligence identified a fortified German strongpoint 3 kilometers northeast, a cluster of farm buildings converted into a defensive anchor. Reports indicated at least 2 anti-tank guns, multiple machine gun nests, and infantry support of unknown strength. Possibly armor in reserve. It was the kind of position that stopped battalions cold. Orders came down at 13:30. The assault would be led by the most aggressive tank commander available. The one who had not broken under artillery. The one who had fought outside a burning vehicle. The one who had already proven he would not stop advancing. The orders named Sergeant Warren Cressy. And this time, the Germans would be waiting. The strongpoint. The farm complex sat behind 400 yards of exposed ground. Stone barns. Low walls. Outbuildings arranged with overlapping fields of fire. Perfect killing terrain. At 1400 hours, Dog Company moved into assault formation. 6 Shermans. 2 columns. Infantry advancing in support. American 105mm artillery began preparatory fire. Shells tore into the farm structures, collapsing roof lines and blasting craters in the yard. But German troops had learned the rhythm. They waited beneath cover. At 14:15, the artillery lifted. Cressy's Sherman surged forward. Thierry pushed 12 miles per hour, fast enough to complicate targeting, slow enough to keep alignment. Distance to objective, 600 yards. At 500 yards, German anti-tank fire opened. The first round screamed past and detonated in dirt 10 feet behind Cressy's tank. They were ranging. Zigzag, Cressy ordered. The Sherman swerved left, right, left, throwing off calculation but losing speed. At 450 yards, an 88mm shell struck the Sherman in the right column. The impact penetrated. The ammunition cooked off instantly. The tank exploded in a violent blossom of fire. No survivors. The formation did not halt. At 400 yards, Cressy located the gun that had fired, positioned inside a stone barn, muzzle protruding through a shattered opening. Protected. Concealed. Deadly. Target barn. The 75mm cannon fired. High explosive struck the wall. Stone erupted outward. The anti-tank gun fell silent. At 350 yards, machine gun fire intensified from multiple angles. Tracer arcs stitched across open ground. Cressy seized the turret-mounted 50 caliber and returned fire, walking bursts across muzzle flashes. The barrel was still heat-scarred from the morning. It kept firing. At 300 yards, the second anti-tank gun engaged, this one shielded behind a low stone wall at the edge of the complex. The first German round missed narrowly. Reload time, 15 seconds. Cressy's gunner fired. The first high-explosive round detonated against the wall, but it held. Again, the second shell struck at the base. The wall collapsed. The gun and crew disappeared beneath rubble. At 200 yards, enemy machine gun fire reached maximum volume. For separate nests firing simultaneously, rounds hammered the Shermans. Most ricocheted. Some did not. In the third tank, an assistant driver took a bullet through his vision slit. Killed instantly. The tank did not slow. Cressy remained exposed. He fired at every flash, every shadow, every sign of movement. At 150 yards, a Panzerfaust rocket slammed into the right side of Cressy's hull. The shaped charge penetrated at an angle. The interior filled with smoke and fragmentation. The loader was hit. The gunner burned. The engine kept running. The transmission still held. The tank was wounded, not dead. Thierry drove. Cressy fired. The wounded crew stayed at their stations. Stopping meant destruction. Forward meant survival. At 14:32, 29 minutes after crossing the start line, the Shermans smashed into the farmyard. The strongpoint collapsed under combined armor and infantry assault. German survivors surrendered at 14:40. Cost: 1 American tank destroyed. 3 damaged. 17 infantry casualties. Objective secured. Aftermath: Cressy's loader and gunner were evacuated with shrapnel and burn injuries. They would survive. They would return within days. Cressy himself carried fragments in shoulder and leg. He refused evacuation. At 1500 hours, the battalion commander arrived. He had listened to the radio traffic all day. He had heard reports of a tank commander fighting from atop a disabled vehicle, breaking a counterattack, leading a direct assault under anti-tank fire. He had fought in North Africa. He had seen courage. He had seen recklessness. Warren Cressy was neither. He was relentless. The battlefield commission was processed that afternoon. Effective November 11, 1944, Sergeant Warren Cressy became Second Lieutenant Warren Cressy. Approved at battalion level. Confirmed at regiment. Finalized by division within 6 hours. The fastest battlefield commission of the campaign. The Medal of Honor recommendation began that winter. Witness statements. After-action reports. Casualty logs. Paperwork would take months. Respect took minutes. By nightfall, every man in the 761st knew what they had seen. The war continued. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for 172 more days. France, Belgium, Germany. The Battle of the Bulge. Sub-zero temperatures where engines froze solid overnight. The breach of the Siegfried Line in March 1945. Advance into Austria. Link up with Soviet forces at the Enns River on May 5th. The battalion lost half its original strength. 356 casualties. 71 tanks destroyed. Cressy fought through all of it. Multiple engagements across 4 countries. Repeated instances of exposing himself to fire to shield infantry. Repeated survival after disabled armor. The historians estimate 300 to 400 enemy casualties directly attributable to his actions. Silver Star, February 1945. Bronze Star, March. For Purple Hearts. None severe enough to remove him from the fight. And through it all, the quiet young man with horn-rimmed glasses remained the same off the battlefield. Polite, reserved, measured, but in combat, he was the most dangerous man in those French woods. The Medal of Honor recommendation was written. Witness statements were collected. After-action reports were attached. It moved up the chain of command. And then it stopped. In 1945, no African-American soldier had ever received the Medal of Honor for World War II service. That barrier would not break for more than 50 years. Not until 1997, long after Warren Cressy was gone. The 761st Tank Battalion was deactivated in Germany on June 1, 1946. The Black Panthers came home quietly. There were no parades waiting for them. No bands. No national celebration. They had fought across France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria. They had breached fortified lines, broken counterattacks, and linked up with Soviet forces at the Enns River. They returned to an America still segregated. Combat excellence did not translate into equality. For more than 3 decades, their record sat largely unrecognized. It wasn't until 1978 that President Jimmy Carter awarded the 761st the Presidential Unit Citation, formal acknowledgement that the battalion had performed with extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming resistance. 33 years late, after the war, Warren Cressy stayed in uniform. He fought again in the Korean War. This time the wounds were catastrophic. He was hit during combat operations and suffered severe injuries to his legs and internal organs. The damage ended his frontline service. Recovery took years, much of it spent inside military hospitals. The Army promoted him, captain, then major. He retired in 1965 after 23 years of service. Medically discharged. The transition to civilian life was not easy. His marriage ended. He lived quietly in San Francisco, spending extended periods at Letterman Army Hospital at the Presidio. The physical injuries from Korea never fully healed. The unseen cost of 2 wars and of serving in a segregated army lingered even longer. But he did something few decorated combat veterans manage. He gave his time to wounded soldiers. He sat beside hospital beds. He talked to men who thought their lives were over. He knew what that felt like. In 1976, he attended his first reunion of the 761st Tank Battalion. He had avoided earlier gatherings. Perhaps memory was too heavy. But that year, he went. He saw men he had fought beside in the woods of France. They were older. Some were ill. All of them remembered November 10th and 11th, 1944. They remembered the sergeant who fought outside a burning tank. They remembered the machine gun on the turret. They remembered the counterattack that never reached them. Warren G. H. Cressy died on October 26, 1976, in San Francisco. He was 53 years old. That same year, his son, Warren Harding Cressy Jr., graduated from West Point. The legacy continued. The battalion, the 761st Tank Battalion, inflicted more than 130,000 enemy casualties during the war. They destroyed or captured hundreds of German vehicles and artillery pieces. They liberated towns. They breached fortified defensive lines. They fought in the freezing forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge and pushed into Austria by war's end. Their decorations included 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, approximately 300 Purple Hearts. In 1997, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers finally received the Medal of Honor posthumously, recognition long overdue. Warren Cressy's medal never came, but the men who fought beside him never needed paperwork to decide who he was. They called him Iron Man. They called him the baddest man in the 761st. They saw him stand on a disabled tank under artillery fire. They saw him pick up a machine gun when others would have taken cover. They saw him do it again the next day. And the next. Medals matter. Recognition matters. But in the frozen woods north of Morville, in November 1944, something more permanent was earned. Respect. And in combat, respect is the only decoration that never fades.